Lastly, here we have agency relationships, and that deals when you have a principal who generally wants to or has some kind of relationship maybe with a third party and engages an agent to take care of that. Employment is actually an agency type of an arrangement, right? You have an employer, okay, and an employee that generally interacts with a third party, right, to perform some kind of a task or whatever, which the third party compensates the principal, right? So employment, but it doesn't have to be employment. It could be other things too. Think about, what do we call a real estate person? We call them our agent, right? What does a professional athlete call the person that represents them in negotiations with owners of the teams, right? They're an agent, okay, a sports agent. So the agent and the third party, right, might negotiate, okay, but the principal can be bound if the agent was authorized. Oftentimes the agent will negotiate with a third party and then take the idea or the contract back to the principal for final approval, but sometimes the agent will, and often in employment things. Again, think about that. When I was a banker, and at whatever level, I had certain authority, right, in order to perform certain things, and they bound the bank. Okay, now if I exceeded my authority, then it was questionable, right? But within my authority, the bank was bound. There was no getting around that. Okay, and so that's kind of the distinction that we make sometimes about whether or not an agent might be authorized. I think outside of employment, most agency agreements are probably going to require the principal to agree to something before it actually becomes formalized. So authority, then, these are the types of things that we talk about, right? There's actual authority, which can be, right, maybe these things all put together a little bit, okay? So actual authority is the authority that a person has, and it can be expressed or written, of course, but in many cases it's implied. It might be implied by a title that somebody has in an employment situation. A vice president probably has more authority than an assistant vice president, okay, or more authority than a loan officer, okay. Not that those other folks don't have some authority, certainly they do, but it does kind of change, okay. Implied authority, again, is that authority that's implied by the circumstances, the norm. If you're the brewmaster for the local brewery, you probably have the authority to order ingredients, right, to make the brew, okay. And apparent is that authority which you think a person has, again, based on the circumstances or maybe based on how they've acted in the past. So if Joe has come and done this all the time, you might expect that Joe has the authority to do that, right? Even though it's not written or even implied necessarily. You become accustomed to the fact that Joe does it, and so that could be apparent authority. And actual authority can be a combination of all of those. So contract outside of agent authority can be ratified and still become binding. So that's agency by ratification. It can be called that. It means the agent engages with the third party, creates an agreement, says, hey, this is a done deal, we're okay. And as long as the principal ultimately agrees to that, that's fine. Okay, that's called ratification. So tort liability from an agent's act. Okay, again, if the harm was caused within the scope of the work, the principal's liable, right? Remember that phrase, respondeat superior? Okay. Remember that this too is interpreted very, very broadly within the scope of work. Okay, I would tell you that when I was a banker and when my title was senior vice president, there wasn't much that was outside the scope of my work. I know that sounds maybe strange, and it was at 24/7 maybe. If I went to the Highline Tavern Association annual banquet, I was generally there representing the bank. Okay, if I bought drinks, a round of drinks at the bar, even if I paid for it myself, It might have been considered, as a way to attract customers and do things on behalf of the bank, and could have been considered within the scope of my work. Believe it or not, it truly is that broad. It's a very broad interpretation. Again, depending on the authority. I don't have any authority as a professor other than to teach you guys, give you grades, do some things like that. I can't contract for the college. I can't make any types of commitments, to buy or purchase or any of those types of things, other than maybe some really small things, through the bookstore or something, but, almost none. Okay. So understanding contracts is critical to conducting business. Yeah, absolutely. Especially as you get into more complicated businesses. This applies to both your personal and your professional life. Again, absolutely. When you enter into a lease, that's a contract, right? And when's the last time you went through an entire day without some sort of a contract affecting your life? Maybe before you were 18. I don't know. I don't remember myself. So there you have it, the end of Chapter 9.